Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a recommendation video that I'm really making for you guys. By far the most recommended recommendations I get is classics for beginners and cozy classics. So I thought today we could combine the two. A nice stack of classics here I want to talk about today. Not all of them are equally cozy or equally perfect for beginners, so I will do a little bit of a scale giving them a rating of how cozy they are and how suited for beginners they are. Looking at these books, all of them would have worked for me at a time where I needed either coziness or when I was beginning my classics journey. First one I want to mention is a YA book, but it's written before YA was really YA as we know it now, so take that with a grain of salt. That is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I read this book a few years ago and talked about it a lot on my channel back then, but that's been a few years. This is set in England in the early 20th century and we follow Cassandra and her family, which tells the extraordinary family and their crumbling castle home. Her father is an author, but not a very successful author anymore. He had a bestseller, but now he's experiencing writer's block. They rent the castle, as you can see on the back, but they cannot really afford to live there. And she, her stepmother and her sister try to find a way for their family to survive. We follow Cassandra as she is coming of age and with all the awkwardness that is part of that. There are love interests in here, there are very bad decisions, very difficult family dynamics, but all of it is quite funny. As the character gets older, it gets a bit more serious, but all the characters have such a funny element to them. If you've seen the film, which I would also highly recommend watching, I think you can kind of understand the quirkiness and the weirdness and the painful puberty moments. They're in the film, they're also in the book. The writing is so accessible. This is definitely very high on the accessibility scale, and this was one of my favorite books of 2021, I believe. It's been a long time. Alright, and then one book that is ranking a bit higher on coziness and a bit lower on accessibility is Short Stories by Katherine Mansfield. I've just grabbed this collection because it's my favorite collection that I have, but I have multiple short story collections by Katherine Mansfield. Katherine Mansfield was a modernist writer, so her writing can be a little bit challenging, but because it's short stories, I think you can really just up your focus and set your teeth into a single story because they are quite cozy. Most of her stories are very domestic. The main characters of these short stories all are from a different class. A few of my favorite ones was about a working class widow. We have a working class man. I think we follow him in like a day in the life, like a TikTok. But then in a modernist short story, in one of Katherine Mansfield's most famous stories, she hosts a garden party. Class is a really big part of Katherine Mansfield's short stories. The main character and their identity and development is always the main focus of Katherine Mansfield. And because the stories are so domestic and so oriented on the family and friendship as well, they definitely have a certain coziness to it. Another book that really focuses on the domestic are also short stories, and this is Cousin Phillis and Other Stories by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is one of the best short story collections I have ever read. These are Victorian short stories that have an amazing plot. Each and every one of them just has the plot of an incredibly engaging, adventurous film in which so many things happen. There's a lot of heartbreak and difficult traumatic events happening in every short story, but always in the domestic, always within the family sphere, always within focusing on the character. Elizabeth Gaskell wrote gothic tales, but these really feel like contemporary fiction, but of course of its time. I fell in love with so many of these characters. They're all so distinct, and I was so impressed how every character felt so real in a short story, how much Elizabeth Gaskell could do in a single short story. Again, the domestic makes it cozy, and the fact that it's so engaging and that there is such a big plot in every short story makes it, I think, quite easy to read because it's never really difficult to know what is going on. So this is definitely short stories I would recommend for beginners as well. The cozy Victorian vibe that you're expecting is in here. I would also recommend Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. That one maybe is a little bit less easy to read, but it's cozier. So kind of depending where you want to go. But for this video, I'm recommending these short stories. Another short one that I think is definitely more accessible than cozy is Silas Marner by George Eliot. George Eliot is one of my favorite Victorian authors. While I will always say that Middlemarch is her best work, Silas Marner is more cozy. It's also heartbreaking and difficult at parts, but again we have the domestic very much at the center of this novel. We follow an elderly man who lives alone. He has had some things happen to him, which you will have to discover yourself because I don't want to give any spoilers. He comes in a situation where he has to take care of a girl. Their relationship and their domestic life felt so cozy to me, and it was so incredibly heartwarming. I would say the accessibility is mainly in the fact that it's not very big and that it's also quite plot driven. George Eliot is a challenging writer, but this I think is her least challenging work, both because of the length and because it's quite plot driven, and you definitely get a bit of a cozy vibe from the domestic atmosphere in this book. Going towards a totally different genre is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I think this is a bit of a basic book to recommend for beginners and also to recommend as a cozy book, because yes, this is definitely a cozy fantasy. It is incredibly slow compared to the fantasies that we read now. My favorite part of any Lord of the Rings or any J.R.R. Tolkien are the Hobbits. I don't know if that's a very popular or unpopular opinion. I'm not familiar enough with the fan base around Tolkien, but I really enjoyed The Hobbit just because it has hobbits and it has that adventure, of course. It has these fantasy elements, but I always cared more about the interaction between the characters. The Hobbit was initially written for children. Well, I cannot really see myself as a child engaging and understanding this book very well. It does mean that it's a bit easier to read than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So for beginners, I would definitely start with The Hobbit. It was my first Tolkien I read myself, and I'm quite happy I started with The Hobbit. I'm not gonna tell you what Hobbit is about because you know, and you know that the cozy vibes are very much present in this book. Another famous author that I absolutely need to mention, and I don't think I can make a classics recommendation video without, is Jane Austen. And it took me a while to decide what Jane Austen's coziest book is. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with me. But I'm going to say Sense and Sensibility. The thing that is so cozy about this book are the sisters, the mother, the family vibes. In Sense and Sensibility, we follow a mother and her 3 daughters. We mainly follow her 2 older daughters as their father passes away and they are shunned out by their brother, kind of. They move into a cottage with the 4 of them. In that cottage, they are in a new place and they meet a lot of new people, amongst whom some eligible and not so eligible gentlemen. I don't know why this is my coziest Jane Austen. First of all, it's one of the easiest Jane Austens in my opinion. Just the writing was most accessible compared to, for example, Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion, which I think are books that are a bit more challenging. I would say start with Sense and Sensibility. Maybe I'm a little bit prejudiced because I did. Whilst not being Jane Austen's first written novel, it was her first published novel, and I read Jane Austen in publication order. It's just the cozy vibes of the conversations between all the women, because we don't just have the sisters, we have nieces, companions, friends, aunts. There's so many female relationships in this book, which is a general thing of Jane Austen, but I think it's especially present in Sense and Sensibility because the male characters are really like there for decoration. In my opinion, I don't find them. Well, there's one character that I find quite interesting, but he has his problematic things going on as well. So I would say read Sense and Sensibility for the women and for their explorations of romance rather than the actual romances. I promise you will have a good time with Sense and Sensibility. I will say that it is not necessarily Jane Austen's most popular book because it is quite calm and domestic compared to her other books, but to me that is what makes it so cozy. I'm saving the coziest book for last because I have one more short modernist classic for you, and that is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. This is set in the 1960s. I think I'm remembering this right. And we follow Miss Jean Brodie as she is a teacher in Scotland and she teaches at a girls' school. It is so funny and ridiculous how she tries to form these girls with the most outrageous and dated opinions. I think the genius thing of this book is that the author isn't agreeing with the main character as well, but that we see how the main character came to these opinions, formed them, and tried to teach them to the girls, but how she is kind of kidding herself. And I found this really funny, and the interactions between the girls and Miss Jean Brodie. Again, we have these female connections that I just find so cozy, and I think the writing might not be super easy, but it's very thin, so I guess it has certain accessibility, and I think especially if you are used to reading literary fiction, then you will enjoy this. Right, and then the coziest books of cozy books. I mean, I'm sure you can guess it. It's Anne of Green Gables. Do I need to say why this is so cozy? We meet Anne Shirley. She gets adopted by a brother and a sister, and they take her into her home. Anne Shirley is just the most uplifting, wonderful, kind main character with such a vivid and beautiful imagination. Everything she does is pure coziness. Her friendships are pure coziness. Her relationship with her adopted mom, pure coziness. I mean, there is a reason that I feel like there's a whole fan base around Anne of Green Gables. is because it's so damn cozy. And she is very much connected as well to autumn, which of course this will make a perfect time to read this book. It was written as a children's book, you can tell, so it's definitely a bit more easier to read than other classics. You can even tell on the font of this edition that it's really for a younger reader, but don't let that stop you, because I really enjoyed it as not a younger reader. Hope I've been able to recommend you some cozy and accessible classics. I will show you the stack again, but all the titles are always in a description as well. Let me know if I have missed any cozy classics that should have definitely been on this list. I know Little Women should probably have been on here, but I want to save that for a Christmas recommendation video because I don't really like to recommend books twice in a short span of time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have found some new classics to read, and I hope that you have a lovely little evening. Doei!